So good morning to everybody. We are very happy to see all of you here in the conference. And yeah, I'm very excited and honored to have amazing speakers with me today. And also I'm very excited about the topic which we will be discussing here today. It's about decriminalisation, a very popular word. Now it sounds like everywhere, everybody's discussing from different perspectives it. I must say that for me it's also a very important topic because I'm from Lithuania, and at the moment actually like in the next 2 weeks in Lithuania we will be our parliament members will be voting for or against the decriminalisation. So I think so it's very exciting for me, and I will be happy to listen about experiences of our colleagues whom we have today, about Norwegian, Portuguese experiences on decriminalisation, as well about UN position, what UN agencies think about decriminalisation and how it should work. Yeah, so I think so. Let's start, because I really would like to leave some time for our discussion in the end of the session. So we will have a beautiful, wonderful presentations, and afterwards you will have some time to prepare your questions. If you will have, I will be happy to answer to it. So we will start with our speaker, Marie Nougier. She's from the IDPC, Head of Research and Communications at the International Drug Policy Consortium. And Marie is responsible for the communications and publications work stream of IDPC, and also engages in networking, civil society capacity building activities, and policy advocacy engagement. Marie is not present here, as you can see. However, we will have her here on this big screen. So I would like to ask our technicians to show Marie to us and to see her message.
Hello everyone, my name is Marie Nougier. I'm the Head of Research and Communications at the International Drug Policy Consortium, or IDPC. I'm really sorry for not being able to be with you today live, but I hope that this video is going to be useful. Before I go into my presentation, I just wanted to say a few words about IDPC. IDPC is a global network of NGOs which aims to amplify and strengthen a diverse global movement to repair the harms caused by punitive drug policies and promote just responses. One of these responses is the decriminalisation of drug use and related activities. And the reason for that is that 1 in 5 people who are currently in prison are there for the drug offence. And of those, at least 21% are incarcerated for simple drug use and possession. Decriminalisation is not a new or an isolated policy. Decriminalisation has been implemented as far back as 1976 in the Netherlands. Today, there are 52 jurisdictions in 30 countries that have adopted some model of decriminalisation for drug use and possession of at least certain drugs. In Europe, that includes 11 countries, which are Croatia, the Czech Republic, Estonia, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Poland, Portugal, Slovenia, Spain, and Switzerland. But as with all policies, the devil is in the detail. And these decriminalisation models vary significantly from one to the other. And of course, so do the impacts of these policies for the lives of people who use drugs. So first of all, getting back to the basics, the objective of decriminalisation is to end punishment for people who use drugs and ensure that those who want to can have access to basic health, social, and harm reduction services that they might need. But in practice, that's not really what is happening. And this is because very often the governments that opt for a decriminalisation model continue to do so in a punitive framework for drug control, which means that some level of punishment continues to be applied, even if drug use and possession are no longer technically considered as a criminal offence. So looking at what is happening all over the world, there are several factors that can impact on how good a decriminalisation model can be, which is people no longer get punished for drug use. And so today I'd like to run you through these factors using examples from across Europe, but also the rest of the world. So first of all, what activity is actually decriminalised? This varies. So in some countries like Estonia, Croatia, and Germany, it's only drug use and possession for personal use that are decriminalized. In others, the cultivation, generally of cannabis, is also included in the decriminalization model. So that's the case, for example, in Costa Rica, in the Czech Republic, in Italy, and Uruguay. And in other countries, social supply is also considered to be decriminalized. So this is the example, for example, of Spain and Armenia. And if you want to ensure that people who use drugs are no longer criminalized, it's important that drug use, possession for personal use, including social supply, cultivation, and possession of drug use paraphernalia are all decriminalized. Secondly, what drugs are actually decriminalized? Same thing, this really depends from country to country. In most US and Australian states, in Jamaica, in South Africa, for example, only cannabis use and related activities are decriminalized. In others, and thankfully that's the case in most European countries, all drugs are decriminalized. Here again, the best decriminalization model is one where all drugs are covered by the decriminalization model, not just one. Thirdly, if you are decriminalizing drug use, you need to be able to make a distinction between what is possession for personal use and what is possession with intent to supply others at a profit. Here again, there are differences on how countries do this, but most make use of quantity thresholds, which define the limit between personal use and supply. Some countries like Spain, Portugal, and the Czech Republic have established set thresholds for each drug. So for example, in Spain, you can have up to 100 grams of herbal cannabis with you or up to 3 grams of heroin. In Portugal, you can have up to 25 grams of herbal cannabis and 1 gram of heroin. And as you can see, there's quite a big difference between these two countries. And that basically happens in every single country around the world. Like the threshold quantities can be drastically different. And the issue there is when the thresholds are so low that they basically render the decriminalization model completely meaningless. And that's the case in Russia, for example, where you can only possess a maximum of 0.5 grams of heroin and 0.3 grams of MDMA. Other countries don't have thresholds at all, and it's up to the discretion of the decision maker to assess whether possession is for personal use or not. And this can have its own problems since there are risks of abuse and corruption with this method. So fourth, and related to this, who actually decides whether possession is for personal use? And this, again, depends from country to country. So in some countries, it's the police that makes the decision. This is actually quite a common way of doing it. And that's the case in Europe for Portugal, Spain, Italy, Switzerland, the Czech Republic, and others. In other countries, it's the prosecutor that makes the decision. This is the case, for example, in Germany. And in yet another set of countries like Slovenia, Poland, Kyrgyzstan, and various Latin American countries, it's up to the courts to make the decision. What's really important here is that you don't want to use heavy criminal justice procedures to decide whether possession is actually for personal use, especially in countries where pretrial detention is very common for drug offenses. So it's absolutely key to ensure that the decision is made as early as possible and that people don't end up in pretrial detention for many years before possession is deemed to have been for personal use. So fifth, what is the response when a person is actually stopped for drug use and related activities? This is where most decriminalization models fail, as most of them continue to impose sanctions, which can be more or less severe, of course, from case to case. So some countries have the option of imposing no sanction at all for people who use drugs. This happens, for example, for people who get stopped in Spain, in Portugal, in Switzerland, in the Netherlands, in Germany, as well as in various US states or in Uruguay. Russia and Estonia are on the other side of the spectrum and continue to impose heavy administrative sanctions for people who use drugs, including administrative detention. And at the end of the day, administrative detention is pretty similar to a prison sentence. In the middle of that, there's a range of options that are being imposed by countries, and these can include fines. So that's the case in Slovenia, in Spain, and in Poland, for example. You can also have referrals to educational courses, for example, in Poland also. You can have community work, like in Portugal, or you can have suspension of one's driver's license, like it's the case in Chile. Various countries also opt for voluntary referrals to health and social services. So that's the case for Portugal, for Italy, Switzerland, and Slovenia, for example. And I think here it's really critical to remember that our gold standard of decriminalization is that there are no more sanctions for drug use. And also remember that even the mildest of sanctions can have severe impacts on a person depending on their circumstances. So a small fine can still have an impact that is drastic on somebody's life if they're homeless, for example. The suspension of a driver's license can have devastating consequences on a person who needs it to take care of their family or to work. So to conclude, although decriminalization is in no way a new or an isolated policy option for decision makers, there is a huge variation in terms of how decriminalization works around the world. At the end of the day, it needs to result in people no longer being punished. And the issue here is that worldwide, people continue to be punished for using drugs, even in a decriminalized environment. At IDPC, our gold standard is, first of all, the removal of all sanctions for drug use and connected activities, and that includes both criminal and administrative punishment. Secondly, the promotion of voluntary access to drug dependence treatment, to harm reduction, and other health and social services for people who use drugs. And thirdly, the meaningful involvement of people who use drugs in each step of the development and implementation of decriminalization. To finish, and to support advocates in their work to promote decriminalization in their own country, IDPC has collaborated with Mainline, the Health E-Foundation, and Frontline AIDS to put together an e-course on decriminalization and how to advocate for it. It's entirely free, and it can be completed at your own pace. So we will also show a brief video that describes the course at the end of the session, but I just wanted to encourage you to check it out and let us know what you think. So that's it from me. Let me know if you have any questions at all. My email is here on the slide, so feel free to drop me an email. And thank you so much for your attention, and I hope you have a great and successful conference.
Thank you, Marie. So I think it was like a beautiful presentation, like giving a background about like how decriminalization should work, because yeah, as you could hear from different examples, there were like different models, and some countries call decriminalization, but in the end, like they're really punishing people by putting them in prison. Myself, I'm also from the region, Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and we have like really some interesting examples when basically the law itself is saying that, oh no, like we are just giving administrative fine, but in the end, like person like gets into the prison because he or she cannot pay the fine. So I think so that we can learn a lot from the gold standards which IDPC mentioned, and also in the end of our session, I think so we will share a beautiful and great link where you can learn more about decriminalization. But now let's move forward, because we have loads of speakers and we have one more actually video input. This year prepared a great report, Drug Decriminalization Progress or Political Red Herring, and we really would like to show it to you. This report is basically assessing the impact of current models of decriminalization, and through the community voices trying to show like how it should work and like what we expect in the future from the decriminalization. So I would like to ask now to show this short video. Thank you.
Over the last decade, there are a growing number of countries moving towards drug decriminalisation has been hailed as a politically transformative moment. But is anyone listening to what people who use drugs think of these policies? Addressing the questions and concerns that people who use drugs have on decriminalisation is critical. without taking into consideration whether the needs of people most impacted by drug policies are being addressed, it is impossible to claim these policy changes are truly politically transformative. To disrupt the narrative that decriminalisation unquestionably represents progress, the International Network of People Who Use Drugs embarked on a peer-driven research project analysing the outcomes of decriminalisation models. Our report, Drug Decriminalisation, Progress or Political Red Herring, draws on qualitative interviews with peers in countries that claim to have decriminalised drug use and seeks to reset the bar by which the international community defines progress on drug policy. Our research identified 6 key areas where decriminalisation impacts the lives of people who use drugs. Policing, detention, and other sanctions. Decriminalisation should eliminate the need to police the lives of people who use drugs. While some peers reported improvement in police interactions, the presence of administrative sanctions enforced by police undermines this goal. Fines for violating low threshold limits can be so steep that they can lead to incarceration even without criminal sanctions. Stigma and discrimination. Peers agree stigma and discrimination against people who use drugs has somewhat decreased post-decriminalisation. However, many remain concerned whether negative attitudes have changed or merely shifted from labelling people who use drugs as criminals to labelling them as sick people needing help. Surveillance and privacy. Peers report increased monitoring and surveillance of people who use drugs after decriminalisation. In some countries, the use of urine drug testing by police has increased, while positive drug tests are used to deny people who use drugs employment, promotions, or salary increases. Access to health and social care. Decriminalisation should be a catalyst for improving access to health services, but results have been mixed. Where there has been improvement, it has been marginal to other policy changes. There continue to be serious concerns about compulsory treatment and drug detention, even after decriminalisation. Meaningful involvement. Decisions regarding decriminalisation are generally made without the participation or knowledge of people who use drugs. Even when there is consultation, recommendations are not always taken seriously. This indicates we are not being valued when it comes to decriminalisation, despite being most affected by these policies. Input's research shows decriminalisation measures have not consistently led to better outcomes. This is because existing models continue to interfere in the lives of people who use drugs through sanctions and surveillance. Based on these conclusions, Input have developed 5 key recommendations on decriminalisation. 1. All models of decriminalisation must fully decriminalise people who use drugs by removing all sanctions and arbitrary threshold amounts. 2. People who use drugs must be involved in all stages of the reform process. 3. Full decriminalisation must include strategies and funding to end stigma and discrimination. 4. Full decriminalisation must include expansion of access to harm reduction and social services relevant to local needs. 5. Full decriminalisation must be viewed as a first step towards a full legal regulation of all drugs. People who use drugs must be heard on decriminalisation. Without our input, decriminalisation is yet another hollow policy change which impedes real progress. We hope this new perspective on full decriminalisation without sanctions will support advocacy efforts towards drug policies which fully recognise the human dignity of all.
So if you didn't read this report, you still have a chance to do it, and you can find it on Input website. So you saw the name. We can share it later as well with you. And I think so, yeah, it's a really great document, comprehensive one, and definitely if you have time, please read it and try to meaningfully involve also those who are affected by different drug policies. Yeah, and I think so it's time now to go and to listen about like practices from our speakers, like what are the drug policies in your countries. And I'm really happy to present our first speaker here on the panel, Rui Miguel Coimbra Morais. I'm sorry, Rui, like don't know how to pronounce your surname correct. So Rui is a psychologist since 1998, and most of his life he was working with different vulnerable populations. And after an invitation from Jose Queiroz from Abdesh, to meet CASO and their group. Rui joined the group CASO, and also from 2014 Rui became a Portuguese representative in the steering committee of the EHRA input, and also a treasurer and later project manager. So Rui, please tell us more about Portuguese, about the famous Portuguese model, because like we are speaking about it like for the last, I know, more than 20 years, and everybody is giving it as a best example, one of the greatest examples. So is it like really like that, or maybe there are some different perspectives? So please, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, all. I'd like to thank you all for this opportunity, and Correlation, IDPC, and say hello to my colleagues. And you know, it's not so black and white. It's we have things in Portugal that, in fact, are still updated if you think in terms of strategy, but there's a lot that wasn't implemented. You know, so when I think in these distances, because we work in the neighborhoods with homeless people, with people that are doing sex work, and there's lots of needs we find on this side of the model, and very few answers that we get from the state. You know, it's we see that things are better. Peer work is a little bit everywhere. It's this year also we did the peer work consultation, asking peers for all over the world how did they feel about working as peers. And Portugal has different teams also with peer workers. We propose that this should go directly to peer, you know, to people that use drugs. We see every year lots of our friends are, you know, still going, and we say it's 20 years, and now in a couple of conferences it will be 30 years, and then yeah, we really hope that these conferences and the networking can also be useful to put pressure, like with the GDPI, you know, no country ranked 100, not even, you know, Norway, that could have the Portuguese model 0.2, but wasn't possible because of the vote no from left party, and so I see lots of contradictions, and we feel there's a lot of competition, people talking on funding all the time. So harm reduction in Portugal, it's on the law. So as we have prevention, as we have treatment or reintegration, we have also dissuasion on one side, that it's a very paternalistic approach where the sanctions are and so on, and then we have a harm reduction pillar that was put in law. And most of the good results that Portugal made was, in fact, thanks to this moment where harm reduction was scaled up. But it was, you know, it's a short moment, because in 2008 they already were, you know, putting a person in jail because of using too much. A situation that went to the Supreme Court. There was no proof of facilitating or of trafficking, and the person was, you know, condemned for being too much sick in a model where there's no crime of using. And these kind of contradictions in a world where there's this global prohibitionism, I think they'll be inevitable. You know, I have to say that also different smaller movements, CASO has registered in 2010, but it's important that the local movements, even if it's not an organized structure, it's important that people take the public space. It's important that people use this public space in their own countries, and try to develop things we've been talking last days. You know, it's the more I look at it and the more I see the road that Portugal has done, I think that if it happened now, we wouldn't have decriminalisation there. There was kind of a moment when we had the President Sampaio, one of the commissioners of Global Commission on Drug Policies, that died recently, and I pay my homage because he was that kind of courageous politic that you know, he signed off the law, the decrim law, and I think the peer or the community-led initiatives will or are a possibility to be in a more democratic environment, learning among peers, disseminating and sharing experiences. And yeah, and that's the kind of work we've been developing there. We have now a seat in different national institutions, I mean, and we participate in the strategy, so they can say that users are involved in policy making, and but the strength we really have, it's very, very little. You know, it's even in outreach teams, we can see that there's a psychologist, an anthropologist, a nurse, a doctor, his wife, and then there's a peer that brings the coffee. And this should be, has done a lot of, has evolved a lot last years, but I think also there's a lot of work to be done. Sorry. Lots of work to be done in this issue of respect, of basic, getting back to basic things. I mean, to give back knowledge we've been taking out of this conference, of these meetings, of this, and really use it back home and wherever we are. And I will stay for now, and then if there's any questions, I'll be able to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rui. Yeah, I think so that peer involvement is also becoming kind of a very, I know, highlighted topic also, like at least on the European level. I know like about other countries, but like we are really speaking more about this, and peers also are part of the creating laws. And when we speak about meaningful involvement, it's, yes, it's about community, it's about activists, experts, but definitely also about peer groups and what they see like from the ground, like from their work as well. So thanks a lot. If you will have any questions, you can think about it, and in the end of the session you will be able to ask your questions to any of our panelists. And yeah, we are now going then to the next speaker. So our next speaker is Zaved Mahmood. Since 2008, Zaved has been working at the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva. Currently, he advises on drug policy and human rights, and he's acting as the officer in charge of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Rule of Law and Democracy section. And also he represents Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights at the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs in Vienna since 2017. So Zaved, we really would like to hear about the UN system common position and how it supports, or does it support, decriminalisation?
Good morning, Darbadan. Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and also I would like to thank the organizer, in particular International Drug Policy Consortium, to inviting me to this meeting. Here, I would like to make the presentation by introducing some tools which UN has recently adopted. The first one is the UN Common System Position on Drugs. And what is it? This is a UN policy document adopted by the 31 principal of United Nations agencies, offices, and funds, different 31, including our office was involved, Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes, UNODC. I see that my colleague from UNODC, Janat, regional representative, she is present here. And also other UN agencies join UNDP, WHO, UNAIDS, UNICEF, UN Women. All the UN agencies make key 31 UN agencies involved in preparing this document. It calls the full title, United Nations System Common Position, supporting the implementation of the international drug control policy through effective interagency collaboration. Why this document is important for us? It is just sheer principle of this document is that we are committing to supporting the government in the developing and implementing truly balanced, comprehensive, evidence-based and human rights-based and development-oriented drug policy, and which can contribute also to the framework of 2013 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Lot of wording here is mentioned, but I wanted to highlight the human rights-based approach. That aspect is, for the first time, even policy document, all UN agency has agreed to support this process. So that was very milestone for us when this document was adopted 2018, almost more than 3 years back. Exactly 3 years back. It was on 8th of November. It was 8th of November 2018. It was adopted. adopted. So it was exactly 3 years back when adopted. It was a really milestone achievement for us. The common values in the document, which has the human rights implication. It includes that the multifaceted nature of the drug problem requires a comprehensive approach that includes effort promoting health, human rights, and including equality and non-discrimination. All these actually related to, I'll come back later on, how this relate to the decriminalization effort. If we take note of this, then definitely we'll come back on that. And also this document recognized that international drug control conventions, international human rights treaties, and other relevant instruments and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development are complementary and mutually reinforcing. Here I would like to mention that it was adopted in 2018, but 2019 again ministerial declaration was adopted at the high-level segment of the CND. In that document, ministerial declaration, the member state going a little more on this. They are recognizing that the measures which is not in conformity with the international human rights law, drug control measures, which is not in conformity with the international law, undermine their joint commitment to addressing the drug problem. So that was big achievement also, that member states themselves recognizing that international law, if it is violated, then international human rights law violated, then it undermines their joint commitment. In this document, few purpose and scope actually mentioned in the document. No one left behind. This is mantra from the SDG. The joint interagency activity promoting that, and to speak with one voice. We commit, UN agency, we commit on that, is speaking in one voice. The UN system, a key human rights commitment, which is mentioned in the common position, the putting people, health, and human rights at the center of the drug control measures. People, health, and human rights at the center of the drug control measures. Promote rebalancing of drug policy and intervention towards public health approaches. Ensure the respect, dignity, and human rights for people who use drugs in all aspects of drug and social policy. Ensure equal access by people who use drugs to public services, including housing, healthcare, and education. Our previous speaker in our, particularly in input, Judy Chang, our colleague Judy Chang mentioned that how decriminalization is affecting to getting all these accesses. So if we look at these 4 points which I mentioned, the key human rights commitment of the UN entities, then decriminalization is a hindrance to reach to these goals. Sorry, criminalization is a hindrance to reach this goal. Just if we wanted to put people, health, and human rights at the center, definitely criminalization, penalization, or punitive approach is not helping us to move forward that. Similar way to balancing the drug policy, we need decriminalization, ensuring the dignity and human rights. Our previous speaker, my colleague Mary, and also Judy and Rui also mentioned that why it is important, that one. In the common position, there is also 8 points which is related to the public health. I'm just going through very quickly 8 points that promote, ensure dignity and human rights. People promote the increased investment in the harm reduction aimed at minimizing the adverse public health consequences of drug abuse. If decriminalization continue, definitely the harm reduction services is being affected in many countries, which we know that. Then also there is a other commitment to ensure equal access by people who use drug to public services, Ensure the provision of drug treatment and other general support service, including healthcare and social protection, also in prison setting are provided. Call for universal health coverage for people who use drugs, people with drug use disorder and positioning of drug use disorder as a public health condition, and then access to control medicine. The common position also includes some criminal justice responses. One of the first commitment with regard to that, the promote alternative to conviction and punishment, including decriminalization of drug possession for personal use, and promote the principle proportionality, address the prison overcrowding. All these points which is mentioned here, decriminalization is help, it is not hinder to achieve all those goals. So just UN entities, UN agencies, offices, we consider that if we wanted to have human rights-based criminal justice system, decriminalization should be one of the major steps for that. Also, in the common position, we commit to support the practical measures to prohibit arrest, arbitrary arrest and detention and torture. Recently, I will come back to the arbitrary working group or arbitrary detention, publish one report. They have very specific recommendation with regard to decriminalization. Also in the common position, UN system call for changes, laws, policy, and practices that threaten the health and human rights of people who use drugs, particularly. It includes decriminalization, I mentioned. There is other related commitment with regard to decriminalization, which include cooperate to ensure human rights-based drug control and address impunity for serious human rights violation. We know that in many countries, in the name of criminalization, in the name of punitive approach to drug policy, serious human rights violation going on. And whether it is mass arrest, whether it is in many countries, extrajudicial killings, so those need to be also addressed. Human rights framework of decriminalization. All this commitment which we have with regard to decriminalization, which we are promoting, it is based on human rights framework. The UN Human Rights Treaty bodies, which monitor the international treaties, human rights treaty, for example, Committee on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights, they have in many occasions developed the jurisprudence why decriminalization is needed. Already mentioned about to reduce the stigma, to remove the discrimination, or to remove the hinder to the right to health, access to right to health. That's decriminalization. There is a really good, solid jurisprudence and legal framework they have developed. In addition to that, within the UN human rights system, different special procedure mechanism like a special rapporteur on right to health, United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, United Nations Working Group of People of African Descent, and also Women Law and Discrimination Working Group on that. All of them, they just argued and they recommended in their reports, statement, and their deliberation that why it is important, the decriminalization. So we have really good, solid argument for that, just why decriminalization is needed, and also High Commissioner for Human Rights. Possibly some of you will remember that she went to harm reduction conference in Porto, and in that statement she very adequately addressed this issue and promote that decriminalization. I mentioned about the working group on arbitrary detention. Recently published one study on the arbitrary detention relating to drug policy. Just this June it was published, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank a lot of you who have contributed in the preparation on this report, including European Harm Reduction Association and others who provided contribution. In this document, UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has very clear recommendation with regard to decriminalization. It's more comprehensive recommendation and based on their evidence and the jurisprudence of their work. decriminalize the use, possession, acquisition, and cultivation of drugs of personal use, including the possession of associated paraphernalia. Also, they highlighted that important role the media could play on that. To positive and evidence-based messaging, it is so important that to change people's perception. We know that in many countries in our society, people have support the punitive approach, very strong approach to address this problem. It has to be like punitive, people has to be prisoned and all these things. But we need to change this narrative. For that reason, media and other publicly available resources can assist to reducing stigma and promote better understanding of the health and other benefit of the decriminalization. It is important that we advocate and also we work with the media and other outlets, social media, the why it is decriminalization is a benefit for reducing stigma or access to health and how it could help. There is a need for changing this narrative. I know that in Latvia, during this deliberation at the parliament, how parliamentarians, they played a role as well, changing public narratives on that. This is important, and the working group is suggesting that. And also another one, promptly release person detained, their recommendation, very strong recommendation, promptly release person detained only for drug use and possession for personal use, and review their conviction with a view to expunging their records. Because large number of people, even in this region, we know that people in the prison now. So their recommendation that they need to be released, not only released, their record should be expunged from the prison records and all things, because that could be detrimental for their education, their employment, and other social areas also. So that action needs to be taken. I would like to highlight another common position which is adopted this year: commitment to promote decriminalization for drug possession and personal use, also included in the recent United Nations Common Position on Incarceration. Again, it is UN entities like UNODC, OHCHR, our office, UNDP, all of us, our principle, they accepted under the leadership of the Secretary General. In this UN system Common Position on Incarceration, again, the decriminalization has been promoted. So we have now 2 policy documents within the UN which we are very much promoting, and we hope that these both common positions could be tool for the civil society to advancing the decriminalization. I would like to put last, not least, that international guidelines on human rights and drug policy, which was adopted in or released in 2019. And this is also a new tool for us, and I think that many of you have seen this document. And in these guidelines also, there is a specific recommendation to states to utilize the available flexibility of the UN Drug Convention to decriminalize the possession, purchase, or cultivation of controlled substance for personal consumption. I would recommend to colleagues to look at this document. It is really useful. It has been developed in consultation with the civil society, community, expert, member states, experts, and different entities. So it is a very comprehensive human rights tool on the drug policy. I think that this would be really good for having a discussion and introduce this document in your deliberation or in your effort to the decriminalization. Last point I would like to mention, that to achieve decriminalization, we need to work with the civil society and effective community, and you are part of that. I put this beautiful picture, which is coming from the Harm Reduction Conference in Porto. And the promote in the common position, UN common position, both common position, we just UN agencies, UN principles, they have agreed to promote the active involvement and participation of the civil society, including communities, local community, and including people who use drugs. But to achieve this, we need to make it firm position that the state authority should ensure that civil society organizations are protected from any intimidation, threat, harassment, and reprisal for their work on drug policy related, including in promoting decriminalization. We do have record, we do have a procedure now within the UN system under Secretary General. Just we record reprisal against the civil society who are engaged in different human rights work within the UN, including who works on the drug policy. And we have mechanism trying to address those intimidation, harassment, and reprisal. It is important that the member state also give the space civil society. We know that now the civil society space is shrinking. Lot of new legislation being introduced in different countries to control them and all these things. We seriously consider that it is detrimental to any human rights work, including with regard to drug policy and our promotion on the decriminalization. Civil society has a strong role to play, and just I would like to mention, in addition to our colleague mentioned about the decriminalization, police, court, and prosecutor Judy was mentioning, I would like to add here, in many countries in the world now, civil society is going to the constitutional court challenging the criminalization. In Mexico, in Colombia, they have managed to go to the constitutional court, and through that court proceedings, judicial activism, I would like to say, through that proceeding, civil society managed to declare through the court the criminalization is unconstitutional for respecting the right to health, privacy, and other aspects of the human rights of people. That one, so civil society can play a role through the judicial activism to use this constitutional code or other judicial mechanism to for the criminalization. Thank you very much. I will stop here. Maybe we'll have questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a brilliant presentation. Yeah, I think so that lately United Nations, like different institutions, organizations were playing like really very important role in developing all these documents, reports, which we as a civil society, as an activist, using in our daily work. And also, you mentioned very important thing about meaningful involvement and civil society to be included in all the actions and processes. And you mentioned mechanisms, like different human rights mechanisms. So I think so that as for us and for our communities, it's also important to not just to do something on the national level, not just like, you know, be in the box, but go a little bit out of it and submit like shadow reports for different human rights mechanisms, because this is also important. And for the like states and governments which are democratic, they're really taking attention into the recommendations of the United Nations human rights bodies and mechanisms, decisions and reports. So yeah, so think about it. And I think so if you will have any questions also about like human rights, how to apply, how to submit your shadow reports, you can always ask also Zaved and our colleagues who are doing it, like Harm Reduction International or Eurasian Harm Reduction Association. Yeah, okay, we are going to our last speaker, and it's really exciting for me to present Tore Sørensen, who is a senior advisor in the Ministry of Health and Care Services, Department of Primary Health and Care Services in Norway. He have also worked at the office of the country governor in Oslo as a special advisor on substance use-related issues and as a senior advisor in the Norwegian Directorate of health. In the period from 2018 to 2019, Mr. Tori was assigned as head of secretariat of the public committee of the Norwegian drug policy reform. So yeah, lately we were hearing loads of news from Norway about decriminalisation. Everybody was so excited, like so much action was going on. And actually, what also Rui mentioned today, this week, actually in the beginning of this week, IDPC, together with partners, released an amazing project. So if you didn't see it, it's Global Drug Policy Index, so you can check it on Global Drug Policy Index website. And Norway is ranking first, actually, in that index. So that's like a big achievement, I would say. So, Mr. Tori, please tell us more about Norway.
Okay, thank you very much for the kind words, and thanks for inviting me to speak at this conference on a topic that has been intensely debated in Norway the recent years. But first I have to say that Norway had a general election this year, and a new government took place in October, and the new government is not in favor of decriminalisation. So it was the previous government that put forward the proposition on the drug policy reform, which was debated in Parliament on the 3rd of June this year, and was voted down. Even so, I hope it will be of interest to you to hear some more about the Norwegian drug policy reform as it was proposed. So, we can draw a distinct line in Norwegian drug policy from about 2015, when explicit reform-friendly statements appeared in various political programs, emphasizing the health perspective on drug policy and that repressive measures should be reduced. But the movement was also a bottom-up process, because the reform also has its origin in a petition several organizations of people who use or have used drugs made upon our politician prior to the UNGAS 2016 to change the current policy on illicit drugs. They demanded a national and international drug policy in accordance with the principles of human rights, and that their voices should be heard in the process. Furthermore, they called upon a decriminalisation of use and possessing of illicit drugs for personal use without being replaced by any other repressive or coercive measures. And this petition, and later the inspiration, of course, drawn from the Portuguese experience, was crucial for former Minister of Health and Care Services, Mr. Bent Høie of the Conservative Party, to change his opinion on this matter. And by January 2018, when the Liberal Party joined the coalition, a drug policy reform became official governmental policy. However, the government did not mention decriminalisation explicit, but use of illicit drugs and possession for personal use was no longer to be punished. Instead, treatment and follow-up services should be provided, and this was to be ensured by a formal transferring of the responsibility to react upon use and possession of drugs from the justice sector to the health and care services. The government nevertheless made it clear that use of illicit drugs should remain illegal, and that this reform was no step towards legalization of any kind of illicit drugs. The government appointed a public committee to explore and assess. No, I was too fast, excuse me. A basic premise for the drug policy reform is that criminalisation of drug use is stigmatizing and contributes to marginalization and social exclusion, and thus prevent providing appropriate health care services. Threat of criminal prosecution influences on whether people tend to seek help for their drug-related problems, and stigma also influences on the quality of healthcare services given to a stigmatized group. The abolishment of punitive responses may lower the threshold for seeking help, as well as create better relations between health and social support services and people who use drugs. This made reduction of stigma an explicit goal for the Norwegian drug policy reform, as it had been in Portugal 20 years before. The government appointed in 2018 a public committee to explore and assess a model for the implementation of the drug policy reform. And overall, based upon the committee's report, the government proposed in February this year a general decriminalisation of use and possession of illicit drugs for personal use. This applied to purchase, use and possession and storage of smaller quantities of illicit drugs, and threshold quantities was introduced for the most common substances, to distinguish between decriminalised and still punishable quantities. Importing, manufacturing and resale would still be criminally prosecuted, and all substances would be seized no matter the quantity. However, the government set the quantities significantly lower than the committee's original proposal, and only possession of 3 different types of substances held at the same time, up to threshold quantity, would be exempt from penal provisions. As using and possessing drugs was still to be illegal, the police would keep the authority to intervene with people who use drugs. But replacing criminal prosecution, person caught using or in the possession of illicit drugs would be referred by the police on the spot to a mandatory meeting with a municipal counseling service. This counseling service should provide information on potential adverse effects of using drugs, as well as professional healthcare and welfare guidance and counseling, and if needed, referral to other municipal services or treatment in the specialized healthcare services. The counseling service per se was considered health care, and it is, with a few exceptions, a main principle regarding healthcare services that it is provided by consent only. The committee had not found any evidence for mandatory or coerced treatment for substance use being more effective than voluntary treatment. On the contrary, such measures can increase the risk of integrity violations and violations of rights. The government agreed and proposed no kind of mandatory or coerced treatment to be imposed on persons who declined or did not follow up on services offered. So even if the meeting was mandatory, only by consent, the need for help would be assessed and further follow-up would take place within the ordinary services. However, failure to comply with the police order for mandatory attendance would be sanctioned by an administrative fee, but fees would only be charged if this would not be charged if this would be unreasonably burdensome due to the person's financial or life situation in general. After a comprehensive assessment of arguments in favor for and against decriminalisation, the committee concluded that criminal prosecution and punishment could not be justified as the preferred reaction to use and possession of illicit drugs for personal consumption. According to the committee, there are good reasons to believe that health-orientated, less invasive measures, as the proposed model, is a far more appropriate and effective response to prevent and counter adverse consequences of drug use. The committee could neither find any empirical evidence to show that decriminalisation of use and possession of drugs for personal use would result in increased drug use in general. There are most likely other factors far more decisive for the prevalence of illicit drug use in a society. And the model was found to be in compliance with the UN drug control conventions by keeping use and possession illegal, and to be reacted upon, though not by criminal prosecution, as well in accordance with principles of human rights and recommendations given by international authorities, including significant UN bodies like the World Health Organization, among others. Even so, the Parliament rejected the proposal. To some surprise, because in 2018 there had seemed to be a majority in Parliament for a drug policy reform, as it was proposed by the government later. But through the public debate, and later when the proposal was debated in the Parliament, it became clear that there was no such consensus, neither in public nor in politically. It was still a consensus, though, that people with severe drug-related challenges should not be criminally prosecuted for use and possession of illicit drugs for personal consumption. But the majority's opinion was that occasional and recreational drug use still had to be punishable. And the majority for the reform was no longer present. But of course, okay, I was to, okay, yeah. But of course, the debate on the drug policy reform had some consequences. The Parliament did vote for an amendment in the penal code so that courts and prosecutors may impose a mandatory meeting with a drug counseling service instead of punishment in form of a fine or incarceration concerning cases of drug use and possession of drugs for personal consumption, but it will still be a criminal offense. An interesting development is that Norwegian courts now seems to pass far milder sentences or even conditional non-prosecution charges for drug offenses, which previously would have resulted in imprisonment. And this is seen as a direct result of the debate on the drug policy reform. And the debate also drew attention to the police working methods and the proportionality of use of force to uncover use and possession of drugs, including searches, physical examinations, and examining of a user's cell phone, etc. The Director of Public Prosecution has initiated a review of police practices in such cases. And furthermore, the Director of Public Prosecution has made it clear that the police are not allowed to force people to test for illicit drugs in any way on suspicion on drug use alone, where no other criminal offense is suspected. So, to close this presentation, I will just say something about lessons to be learned. And of course, this is not an analysis, but my consideration, my opinion. It's not to be recommended to propose significant changes in such a controversial field as use of illicit drugs still is in Norway in an election year, because it obviously became a part of political campaigns for elections. So that was a challenge, I think. Furthermore, I think the government underestimated the reluctance to make such a radical shift in policy. The police, including the National Police Directorate, strongly opposed the reform, and so did some NGOs, especially those originating from the abstinence movement and the war on drugs era. The government most likely took for granted that the majority for a drug policy reform still was present in the parliament and relied on user organizations to promote the reform and had no clear communication strategy on its own. A more systematic approach and a longer timeline for dialogue with the part of civil society who opposed the reform may have helped. As it was, the intention and reasons behind decriminalizing use and possession for personal use, regardless of type of illicit substances, and including occasional and recreational use, emphasizing both the preventive and as well as harm reduction perspective, was not sufficiently communicated nor accepted in the public or political opinion for now. For decriminalisation is still being discussed in Norway, and many NGOs and political parties still campaigns for the reform, predicting that it's only a matter of time before it will be implemented. So I think I'll leave you with that, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for a comprehensive presentation and about all the situation happening in Norway. And as we have only 15 minutes left, I would like to ask, maybe you have any questions, maybe we have any questions, comments, sharing something from your country perspectives. But while you're thinking, I can also ask one question which we received online, because we have also people who are watching us who couldn't come here and be with us, but we received one question. So now you have a few minutes to think about some questions, and the question is addressed to you, Zaved. The question is, what are you doing, what is your agency doing to make governments aware of the common position and also about the recommendations across Europe? Like, what are the actions, like how you're making other states and governments to be aware of all these documents?
Thank you very much. It is very practical questions that what we are doing to promote or even implement this common position, which I mentioned. When it was adopted by the UN system in 2018, after that we engaged with the dialogue in different government and different entities as well. For example, immediate after that, we went to the Brussels to introduce this common position to the horizontal drug group of the European Union. And we had a discussion with the 27 countries representative. That time it was 28 countries. Still UK was in that horizontal group. Jamie is saying, we are not talking about Brexit, okay? But anyway. But horizontal drug groups, to them we introduced that one. We saw the result of, after that dialogue and engagement with them, the European Union new strategy on drug policy incorporated the UN common position in the document. So that is the big recognition of the UN common position by the member state of the European Union to include that in their common position. Next one, I would say that Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly recently conducted a study on human rights-based approach to drug policy, led by their special rapporteur, Scottish Parliament member Hannah Bedell. And in that study, they very clearly recognized the common position's importance, and then they included in the study for the implementation of that common position. And then also I would like to mention the Pompidou group. In their recent deliberation and documentation, they recognized the common position. I was in Paris just 2 weeks back on the 50th anniversary of the Pompidou group, and I highlighted and discussed this common position then. Lastly, from our side, I would like to mention that very recently, last August, we have sent this common position with a guidance to all UN resident coordinator. I know that in Europe, particularly in a broader Europe, Central Europe, or in the East Europe, a lot of UN country team there, that we provided UN country resident coordinator very clear guidance on how to implement this and promote and implement this common position, and also to include this common position in their country common assessment. So we are continuing to engaging with the government, but I would like to, at the end, again, I would like to mention the role of the civil society to promoting this common position and also pushing the common position for implementation. It is really important. Use this common position as your advocacy tool. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the answer. And I see that we have a question, right? Okay. Yep. We'll give them this. Thank you, Jamie.
Milutin from the Drug Policy Network Southeast Europe. Actually, what I wanted to ask was the last part of your reply, and I just want to comment to it. When we first got information about the common position, we were so enthusiastic, and it's really an excellent document. And then what I did first is to contact the regional coordinator of UNODC for Southeast Europe, and I said, yeah, this is great. So let's go to the coordinator of UN system in Serbia and talk with him how together. And he said to me, Milutin, take care. It will not work so well on the local level. UN agencies have their own portfolios, and it's very hard to coordinate it. So it's now nice to hear that you have sent this instruction or whatever, called guidelines, to the local UN coordinators, and I think it's very important, you know. It's very important because usually we need that support which will be clear and kind of coordinated by all UN structures in the countries. It's not about only UNODC representative or us who are from this area. It's about coordinated work of all UN agencies and all of us who are in different ways working on drug policy issues to get the momentum. Because even whatever also you do with the states, it's on the states at the end if they want to or not to adopt something. So, and then whatever good, excellent document we design on the international level, states can just simply say it's not in our interest or whatever you call it. So it's a very hard process, and I really advocate for a coordinated joint work on adopting these documents. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Masha from Eurasian Harm Reduction Association, and I have a question, I think, to all of the panelists. So we spoke a lot about possession for personal use, and as Marie mentioned in her presentation, it often comes down to the quantity of the substance that the person has. And as also Marie and Eliza mentioned, there are like very different approaches in all the countries to these thresholds and how they're measured. And my question to you is, do you think we need some unified approach to how we measure these thresholds, or maybe we don't need these tables at all? And if we need this unified table, who should do it? Thank you.
Hello. Well, I think there should be a personalized approach, a tailor-made approach, and I think the limits and the quantities will have impacts very differently. If we have the impact of the medium of 10 days. If I am going out the weekend and buy cocaine, for instance, I could go to jail. Or if a friend of mine is going to the neighborhood and buy for 5 or 6, so the quantities, I think it should be determined by the needs of the person, in my opinion. Sorry.
Just maybe also to clarify, because we had like some time ago a very interesting also training like in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, where we're discussing like with different country representatives, like should we have like a global unified system of these thresholds, you know, because like in each country, in some country like small amount is until 5 grams, and in some countries it's like 200 grams, and like, you know, it's like so different. It's even not like close to each other. So what do you think if such a system of like unified global system of thresholds could exist, could work? I know maybe Zaved have any ideas?
Honestly speaking, it would be very difficult for me to respond to that question because I didn't look at it. But one thing, from human rights perspective, I would like to mention that baseline, just minimum thing, just what we are trying to advocate, that decriminalization is a hinder to access to health. It promotes stigmatization. It promotes discrimination. So we need to stop criminalizing people. Whatever the threshold, whatever that is the different discussion, but basic issue is that here, that this criminalization is just harming people. So we have to remove from that punitive policy. I would like to read out one quote. I'd like to quote our Secretary General Antonio Guterres when he joined as a Secretary General in his first statement on 26th of June in 1917 on the International Drug Day. He issued a statement. I'm quoting from his statement. He said, quote, "As Prime Minister of Portugal, I use the flexibility afforded by the 3 International Drug Control Convention to introduce non-criminal responses to the possession of drugs for personal use. Greater resources were allocated. for allocated to prevention, treatment, and social integration program, including harm reduction measures. And I think that this is the key issue, that just with not only criminalization and allocating resources for prevention, stigma, moving stigma and all these things, that it is so important. It has to be culminative of different, culmination of our different measures that could yield to effort or result. All these efforts could yield to result. Thank you.
Thank you. And we can take the last question. And yeah, we had there like, yeah, first, yeah.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Sabrina Sanchez from ESWA. It's a European Sex Worker Rights Alliance. And this is, well, a comment for Mr. Sørensen, that I'm really happy to see that in Norway and like a Scandinavian country, something that is called the decriminalisation word. But on the other hand, it's for me as a sex worker, it's a little bit contradictory that in some part we have that in a ministry from a government that has a regulation on sex work that it's criminalizing a key population that can also intersect on sex work on drug users. So it's a little bit contradictory to find that the criminalization narrative that we are pushing forward, and it's against a criminalizing and a criminalizing framework around another part of probably drug key populations. So my commentary maybe would be like a suggestion that from your ministry you can push forward also that to change a little bit the legal framework in another subject that also has to be the criminalization, because your arguments are fantastic and can be applied also to sex work laws as well. Because that's the way the criminalization and recognitions of also sex workers that also reduce stigmatization. So I really congratulate your work and towards this mindset. But I will appreciate that also another parts of your government can go forward in other frameworks, and most precisely around sex work. Thank you very much.
Is this on? I think this debate on the drug policy reform in Norway also applies for other areas that need to be discussed and assessed in another way. So, but of course, also the Norwegian drug policy reform was voted down for this moment. So we are there we are, but it's interesting thoughts.
Thank you. And yeah, you know, like in 1.5 hours, we actually couldn't cover all the decriminalization topic. It's pretty broad, right? So what we thought, but in the last 3 minutes, which we still have now until the end of our session, we would like to share with you the last video about drug decriminalization e-course, which is prepared by International Drug Policy Consortium, IDPC, and which is accessible on their website. So if you want to learn more about decriminalization, how it works, what are the golden rules, what you should do, how you can be engaged with your governments, then now you can see on video. Like if technicians could help us to show video, that would be much appreciated.
We believe that drug use should not be considered a crime, and that people who use drugs should not be punished. The process of making this happen is called decriminalisation, and it can play a crucial role in protecting public health and human rights. Yet decriminalisation can be hard to advocate for and complicated to put into practice. It may require changes in public opinion, political messages, national laws, and in the way police and courts work. The Drug Decriminalisation e-course is a free-to-access online learning course that is open to anyone interested in this important topic. Across 7 interactive, engaging modules, the course will take participants through definitions of criminalization and who already supports this approach, the existing models of decrim in more than 30 countries around the world. How best to make the case for decrim using different arguments and evidence. The different policies and decision-making structures for putting decrim into practice. How legal systems can distinguish drug use from drug trafficking. What responses could be offered instead of criminalization, including access to voluntary treatment and harm reduction services. What is the gold standard model of decriminalization? You can take just one module or 7 and in any order you prefer. The whole course has been designed to fit around you. At the end of each module, you will receive a certificate of participation. Our course host, Nougier, will guide you through the modules, each of which should take between 1 and 2 hours to complete. They include videos, exercises, and key information that will equip you to help move the world towards decriminalization and away from the war on drugs. The Drug Decriminalisation e-course has been created by the International Drug Policy Consortium in partnership with Mainline, Help E Foundation and Frontline AIDS, and using funding from Pitch and the Robert Carr Fund for Civil Society Networks.
Everybody is doing a picture, idpc.net/decriminalisation. That's where you can find more information and learn more about decriminalisation. I would like to thank you, our panelists and our online panelist, Marie, who is not with us, for brilliant presentations, for speaking about the need of changing our perspectives and approaches to the punitive laws. And thank you, all of you who came in such an early morning. And thank you and enjoy the conference.